I'm gonna let you in on a little bit of a secret. I pretty much always shoot in RAW. No matter the situation, I will pretty much always shoot in RAW, even when I know that it means it'll cause me more work. I'll have to do a little bit of an edit to the photo to get it where I want it to be, even if I'm just taking it to where it would be if I'd shot in JPEG. I will almost always shoot in RAW, and I've done that for a long time. I learned pretty early on when I was learning photography about the benefits of RAW and the difference between RAW and JPEG and how much better it is, and I never really looked back. And there's a big thing in the photography community about shooting in RAW. It's like a big deal, and I think probably everyone would agree that in a lot of ways, RAW is a better file format to shoot in. If you're not familiar with RAW, we actually even have a whole video ourselves all about why you should shoot in RAW. It basically gives you a huge amount of data compared to JPEG, and you can play around with things and push and pull the photo so much more. So for example, white balance, you can completely change it when you shoot in RAW without destroying the photograph. You can completely change it. Whereas with JPEG, you only can push and pull that a little bit. Same with highlights and shadows. You just have a lot more data on a RAW photo than you do on a JPEG. But the downside, of course, is that when you shoot in RAW, generally speaking, you will need to do a little bit of processing to that photo at the bare minimum to bring it up to where the JPEG would actually start from. Now, most of the time, if you're intending to edit your photo, that's a good thing. It gives you much more room to edit that photo the way you want it to be. But the question that we're going to talk about today is, should you always shoot in RAW? Is there a place for JPEG? Is JPEG really that bad? Well, obviously, as with all questions like this, there's no solid right answer, although I think it's probably fair to say that the right answer is that you don't always have to shoot in RAW. You can absolutely shoot JPEG sometimes, and it's absolutely fine. But how do you decide what's best? And actually, is there something you can do to become a better photographer? Is there something that is holding you back by maybe always choosing RAW? Now, before we get into it, I do want to say, I love your opinions on all this stuff, so pop them down in the comments, because you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with me at all. And I'd love to hear your perspective on this, and how do you choose whether to shoot RAW or JPEG? The reason I actually started thinking about this is because I review cameras, and often I'll review cameras before they come out. And when that happens, I cannot actually use the RAW codec or file type because it's not in Lightroom yet. So I have to shoot in JPEG, or typically I'll shoot RAW and JPEG so that I have the RAWs for later on. But it means that a lot of the time I do have to shoot JPEG. And I'll be honest with you, it's really not too much of a problem most of the time. There are a few situations where I've come up against the photo not being able to be kind of edited the exact way I'd like to. There are a couple of situations where I haven't been able to really push the look and the style of the photo as much as I'd like because it's a JPEG and things like the sky start to fall apart. But for the most part, it's really not too bad. It depends a little bit on the kind of situation that you're in. If you're in a very dark and light situation, it's a very, very sort of wide dynamic range where you've got a lot of highlights and a lot of dark shadow, absolutely RAW is going to help you out a lot there, because you're going to be able to pull back a lot more information from both of those areas. If you're in a situation where you're not quite sure how you want the final photo to look, RAW is always going to be a much, much better option. So for example, this photo, I was able to push and pull and really change because it was shot in RAW. But then again, this photo was shot as a JPEG, and I took it to this point from this point. And you can see that's quite a dramatic difference as well. Now, there are some massive advantages of shooting in JPEG. Number one, the photo is done in a lot of ways. Straight out of camera, you can work with that photo, you can send it off, you can send it wherever it needs to go, you can print it. It's kind of already processed and done. You can do more to it if you want to, but you don't have to. Whereas with a RAW photo, you do have to. A lot of cameras, especially Fujifilm cameras, will have actual certain stylistic effects that you can apply to the JPEGs as you shoot. So for example, in Fujifilm cameras, you have the film simulations, which are beautiful. Some of them are really stunning. And while yes, you can apply those to a RAW photo, it's just very easy to shoot JPEG with those applied and have a finished photo straight away. Not have to then go and edit it, process it on the computer. then export it, and then do whatever you're gonna do with it. Now, for me, I'm an editor, right? I love editing photos. I love seeing what I can do with them. I like giving them a specific style. And I must admit, now I've got to the point where when I'm taking photos, I'm already thinking about the edit. I might change it into black and white. I might have a specific color grade in mind. That's a lot easier to do with a raw photo. But other times, wildlife photography, sports photography, car photography, whatever it might be, a lot of the time JPEG is more useful in that situation because I want to snap those photos. I'm not looking to do some wild edit on it. I want kind of the photo of what happened. You know, these photos were taken on the Canon R7, and I wanted the photos to reflect what I saw, the actual wildlife that I saw. And that means that shooting in JPEG is a perfectly viable option. You have a little bit less flexibility when it comes to your exposure. If you're shooting in JPEG, you need to make sure it's pretty much on the money, but that's probably something that you should be doing anyway, right? I mean, that's an important part of photography. And I think sometimes knowing that you can pull things back, you can push and pull the photo because it's a raw photo, it certainly makes me sometimes a little bit lazy with my exposure, or just the knowledge that I can do that makes me think about how I'm taking the photo in a different way. When you shoot JPEG, you want to be as accurate as you possibly can with that exposure. And so it's important to think about that a little bit more. Now, we did a video recently all about film photography and why you should think like a photographer using film. You don't have as much chance to kind of fix it in post. And that's the same here. You don't have that opportunity that you have with raw photos to fix the white balance or to fix the exposure as much. You can do a little bit, but you can't do as much as you can with a raw photo. So actually the process of switching to shooting in JPEG can kind of make you a little bit more of a conscious thinking photographer. At least that's what happens to me. It makes me more aware of that final image and needing to be better at capturing it in camera rather than relying on the edit when I get home. My advice, and something I'm trying to do now, is to have a little think before you go off to your shoot. Whatever the shoot is, think about what's gonna serve you better. Are you gonna wanna sit there editing the photos and doing all that stuff? Then let's shoot raw. Do you want some quick processing time? Do you need to get something to a client? Are you looking to get that final result looking very natural and stuff like that? In which case, JPEG is probably a better option. It still means for me that probably 80% of the time I'm gonna be shooting raw, but it does mean that I am gonna switch over to JPEG every now and then, because sometimes it's just not worth it for all that extra file size with the raw photos, for all the extra space it's taking on my SD card and then on my computer, the extra time I'm having to work to edit these photos. Sometimes I want them to look straight out of camera, so I may as well shoot straight out of camera. But I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Raw, JPEG, do you stick to one specifically? Do you switch between them? How do you decide? I'd love to know. It's a really interesting conversation because I think in photography, the general consensus is once you learn a bit about photography, you start shooting in RAW and then you never change. And I think I get it, I totally get it. I mean, I've been doing it for years and years and years. I've just shot in RAW. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this stuff. As always, you guys are super insightful and I really enjoyed the kind of conversation we get going down in the comments. Of course, there's links to all of the cameras and lenses and stuff for this video, for all these photos, down in the description of this video, so you can go check them out for yourself. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because there's new videos all the time. I'll see you in the next video. But until then, as always, thanks for watching.